Across Africa today, debates about debt are no longer just about numbers. They're about power. They're about who gets to decide how Africa grows, who owns its future, and what price sovereignty truly carries. China has become the continent's largest bilateral lender, financing everything from roads to railways, from ports to power plants, and reshaping the very architecture of African development.
But behind every loan lies a deeper question. Is this partnership or dependency with Chinese characteristics? Africa's external debt now exceeds $1.1 trillion, and Beijing holds roughly 12% of it. From Zambia's default to Kenya's standard gauge railway repayments, the China story cuts both ways: ambition and anxiety, investment and influence. From Cairo to Cape Town, Lagos to Lamu. 54 nations, one continent, countless perspectives. Hi, I'm Waweru and Njoroge.
Hi, I'm Njoroge.
Welcome to Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens. This is the podcast where we unpack power, policy, people, and the paradoxes that define our time. With nuance, with history, and with a deliberate commitment to context. This isn't punditry, it's perspective. It's not a briefing, it's a reframing, and it starts right here.
To help us unpack this paradox of debt and power, we're joined by Kevin Kigima Ng'ang'a, economist, fintech innovator, and the immediate former country director of Virtu, a man who spent 2 decades watching how money moves across borders and how financial sovereignty shapes nations.
Thank you for having me.
Karibu sana. That kind of intro, 2 decades sounds like a very long time. Rather than saying 20 years, okay, fine,
Yeah. I think it's been a run. It's been challenging. 20 years, 18 of which were in banking. Then prior to that, subsequent to that, got into cross-border payments. I think what I've seen is across 7 markets that I've sort of managed is the renaissance and everybody talking about Africa being the new middle class, and sort of went through that in the early 2000s. But it's been an exciting run. I think this conversation on debt is quite pertinent, and primarily this sort of happened in the early 2000s, 2010s is where sort of China sort of with the China and Road Belt Initiative sort of made a very deliberate effort around how are we going to secure our position as a global leader in whether it is economics, whether it is soft power. And I think that's what's going to sort of frame this element of what is it really a debt trap or what we're discussing, and looking forward to engaging.
Okay, cool. In fact, we're just going to jump into debt trap diplomacy, in quotes, unquotes. Yeah, this has become basically the global standard or shorthand for China's lending in Africa. Yet the data tells us probably a much more complicated story, as you had started alluding to. And there's a study from Boston University Global Development Policy Center that shows that African governments still owe more to Western private creditors and multilateral banks than to China. However, Beijing's loans are probably much more visible, and they're more tied to things like ports, highways, and energy infrastructure. So my question is, and you've just alluded to that fact, is when we talk about China's debt trap, what is actually real and what is actually rhetoric?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's 2 things you need to look at when you look at Western debt versus China debt. I think that's where you need to start with. When you look at Western debt, it is primarily financial and sovereign. So it's not typically tied for what I would say a commercial transaction. So you find that World Bank or IFC or the bondholders, the private bondholders, typically give you money and you tie your sovereignty to it. So if there is a default, it's a sovereign default. What typically then happens with China is China does commercial transactions. So what then they are is 2 things. Number one, they're typically shorter dated. They are at commercial terms. And then 3, they're usually, for lack of a better word, secured, not by sovereignty, but by actual assets. So then what you have is a scenario where visibility, so a bond a Eurobond issued by the Westerners would typically not be visible. It'll be in the books, but you'll not see.
Yep.
You have an SGR where you can see the trading
Yeah.
news. So what then typically happens is the commercial loan that you've been given to finance this infrastructure is visible. Now, what is exaggerated is obviously everybody talks about the horror stories, Sri Lanka, Djibouti. But if you look at if you go into the details technically, it is about if I borrow and I give a security, and I would just want to bring this down to a very simple. If Kevin takes a mortgage and I default, right, my house will be sold, or I get into a negotiation with the bank, right?
To
It's the same
restructure the thing, yeah.
It's the same thing.
So then what does negotiation look like? We are talking here about, all right, so perhaps there's no need to overlook African sovereignty or African agency when it comes to these loans. How then do nations leverage? Are African nations actually at the negotiating table? Or is it here's the money, do as we say, get interest back?
So the thing about infrastructure, the Chinese approach is, one, it's a quicker turnaround time. So compared to when you negotiate with an IMF or you can typically go into 36 months. So a lot of African governments have a political element to it where you want to show, demonstrate visibility of what I've done from a political side. So what the China loans typically provide you is a quicker turnaround time. I'm in government for 5 years. I need to show something, right? So China comes and tells you, let's do an SGR, for example, or let's do a port. So it gets quicker. Now, where I think we miss the boat as Africans is to ask ourselves strategically, why is China doing this? In every negotiation, you want to understand what's in it for them, right? They are trying to secure their raw material because it's a global economic play. It's now the world is moving to multipolarity. So one thing that I struggle with African governments is they don't think it's very quick to turn around, and we don't leverage more on what I call best case negotiators. I think, for example, Botswana has significant Chinese debt, but it's stable, it's long. You never hear of anything around debt distress in Botswana. So why don't African governments say, hey, Botswana, what is it that you did strategically? I think that's where and I think there's an element to governance as well on that.
Okay, so then you look at the time, every time a loan comes up, there are many flags that pop up at the same time, and Beijing's rise as Africa's top lender coincides with global Belt and Road Initiative spanning over 40 African countries. There is a desire to put a road through that will connect one part of the world to the other. That's very clear. In return, there's funding for roads, there's funding for ports, there's dams, there's corridors. Some argue that there's quiet control over strategic assets. How real is the risk of China using debt to gain inroads or control of Africa's strategic assets? Is that a thing, or is it conspiratorial?
I think it's more of the latter. Let's take, for example, the Djibouti naval base setup. Is China knows, and goes back to my earlier point, China knows that Suez Canal, shipping routes through Suez Canal is critical, right? They don't have military presence in the Middle East. That's a critical route. So what then does China need to do? China thinks strategically and say, how do we secure our interests, right? Now, it may look like we are telling you mortgage your port, give us a naval base. No, what I think is conspiratory is Africa, China has not acquired any asset, despite Zambia defaulting, Ethiopia defaulting, they haven't acquired any asset, right?
Okay.
The thing is, what you want to understand, and this is, I think, a culture thing, is China are commercial. You shouldn't approach these negotiations as you're a friend or that. You need to understand what they want to achieve. And I think you want, as a country, to ask yourself, if we are being built for a road, what is in it for us?
Right.
Is this loan productive, right? Not just putting any infrastructure that creates what you call a dead asset, that doesn't create any return on economic capital, not revenue, but return on economic capital. That's where I think the mismatches are. There's a perception, and I think there's also you've got now this multipolar approach to the world, where you've got the Western media sort of sensationalizing that you see these guys took over a port in Sri Lanka. But if you look at the devil of the details in this, it was actually a debt for equity. So China offered, look, instead of you defaulting and I'll give you some debt relief, however, give me equity, which happens in many, remember, commercial transactions, right?
Okay.
I need to get paid, but I'm not going to break your back, right? So this is what you're going to do, and we can then revenue share that, and whatever you make from the pot, I'm able to do that. So sometimes it just needs you to look at a bit more on the details before passing judgment that they are coming to take all your strategic assets. However, there is soft power from a global politics perspective.
You mentioned Western countries. Now I'm looking at, if you compare the two, if you look at China, the way China lends, you say commercial, and then you look at the Western side with the likes of IMF and what have you. And what Ndu was asking about how we negotiate. Are we as Africans now, as we see things unfold, learning to play both sides of the game? Because we've got everybody looking at us and saying, next scramble for Africa, and what have you, rubbing their hands very gleefully. So we're at a point where we can actually learn how to play both sides. But are we actually doing that?
I think there's a big opportunity where you can then negotiate a lot better terms between Western and the Chinese, sort of that. And the thing here you need to remember is you're securitizing. On the Western side, you're securitizing your budget. China is telling you, just give me your car. So if I was to localize this, take Waweru, you have a house, you have a home and family, you have an income.
Yes.
Kevin International comes and tells you, I want to give you loans, but your children need to pay you every month a stipend. Okay? So the children are asking, why am I being made to pay more? Right? So it doesn't look easy, but Waweru needs he has a lifestyle he needs to. He has 3 holidays he has to take his children to.
Of course.
The income doesn't justify 3 holidays,
anyway.
right? So
Okay.
so you get scenarios where that's now Western debt, right?
Right. Okay.
Now, Ndu Exim Bank comes and says, hey, Waweru, your house looks nice, but I think you need to have an integrated shower system that allows everybody to get hot water.
As we must, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There is no real economic benefit for hot water, but there's a feel-good factor because Waweru can be divorced if he continues having cold water in the house, right? So Waweru technically goes and plays the politics and says, hey guys, you guys have hot water throughout the day. Okay? Now, that hot water comes with conditions and challenges. There's a higher electricity bill. There is that. So if Waweru doesn't think strategically that I'm going to pay a higher electricity bill and that, then it starts looking like this hot water solution that has been financed for only 5 months looks like a trap, right? So I think what you want to do, and just landing the point home, is there's an opportunity where Waweru can say, okay, I can take a little bit from this other guy who's telling me my children need to pay me a stipend, but I also then realize maybe strategically, as opposed to a hot water solution, maybe I want to develop a room, maybe change one of the rooms into something that generates income. Right?
Okay. Airbnb.
Airbnb. Again. So Waweru, and this is where the governance and transparency for Waweru sovereignty comes in, and you just need to be honest with yourself.
Okay.
Let me play both sides, but this is going to help me generate certain revenue, Airbnb of one room, and then that. So that's where I think the
can actually,
opportunity comes.
Okay.
And that's not happening currently. That African nations are not they're not being strategic in thinking on how to then navigate this big
and that's
bad
where
world
we
of
struggle.
loans.
I think that's where we struggle with. I think it's a journey. I always argue that Africa is technically 70 years old, and you're being asked to do 300-year sort of things because everybody did the infrastructure, agri development, the global north did all that. You're being asked to race quicker. I think Africa needs to take a step back and say what's our story and what is good for us, and understand those strategic levers and use that to leverage, whether it is China, whether it is the Western, or even BRICS, right? That sort of play.
Okay.
Okay, so even as we look at this and how it works, can we use debt towards prosperity? Can you? Because it's been argued on many levels that the only way to go towards economic development and prosperity is if you are if you're creating and selling at a profit. There's surplus that comes, and that's how you develop. And that you can't develop on debt. Is that true? Can you?
No, debt is... I think people should stop fearing debt. Debt in itself is an important tool for economic development. What you want to make sure is the productive nature of what the debt is taken for. What are you taking the debt for? What are the economic benefits that you will realize? The part that then debt becomes unsustainable is if you take debt to pay civil servant salaries.
Okay.
If you take debt for recurrent expenditure, you have to maintain a balance, right? Because there's always, like, when I say local debt, external debt technically should never be used to pay recurrent expenditure. You get so what I struggle with is the element of transparency, where I mean, not to cast aspersions, but there's so much secrecy about the SGR contract and who signed what and where, and you're just saying, look, if the deal was above board, why not, right? But if you then take a Eurobond, you raise a Eurobond and immediately use it to pay salaries, doctors' arrears, you're never going to generate income because that debt is going to have to be repaid. So it becomes a big challenge. And for me, I don't look at debt as a bad thing. America, if you take the Western, for example, the New York Underground Railway, it's built on debt, right? It's not that everybody looks at debt as a bad thing. I think you just want to understand the productive nature. Are we putting up warehouses to secure value addition in agriculture? Are we putting in, even if it is SGR, are we saying, okay, what are the supporting ecosystems around the rail that would support? Okay, can we then combine power? Look at your power generation and say, okay, let's put power generation to be able to get industry to quickly produce or manufacture, put the stuff
onto
on
the
SGR
train
and take it down to the port, and that sort of thing you get. And even supporting infrastructure, the whaleys, supporting infrastructure, hospitals around the manufacturing industries, all these SEZs that have been commissioned. What is the supporting infrastructure you want to do so that the expanded elements of what that China debt that has now been yuanized, I call it, now we have panda debt.
Okay.
We now have panda debt. What is that going to do? And I think people need to realize debt is never really repaid as a sovereign. You always just
keep adding on it.
You keep adding on it. And
that's the analogy of never ever paying off your bridal your
Dowry.
The dowry.
because it
Exactly.
keeps the families coming back together.
100%.
Okay, that's cultural. I'm going to stick to the matter of. I'm going to look at the matter of debt and now basically distill it down into an aspect of now understanding it from a family perspective, right?
Yeah.
As a family, or as me, as head of household, I say that very proudly. I will borrow to grow, and I'll borrow against tomorrow, right? Whatever whatever mitigation I need to put in. And across the African continent, governments borrow in our names.
Yep.
Mine, yours, Ndu's, right? And we also pledge future taxes, exports, and even power revenues. Case in point, though, Zambia defaulted in 2020. Right? Kenya's debt service right now is over 60% of our annual revenue. Right? That, in terms of the parallels I like to draw, is a family struggling to balance ambition with affordability. That's what is really much very stark and very clear. So my question then becomes this. As a country, like a family, can we grow without actually taking any debt? Or is there such a thing as good borrowing?
Yes, there is such a thing as good borrowing, and I think it's very specific to each family. And I'll say, for example, take Waweru as a household. How does Waweru look at his family ambition? Is he a 5-year planner? Is he a 30-year planner? Or is he multi-generational planner where he says, okay, I have 3 kids. I want to secure the financial future of my kids. Or as the head of the household, I'm saying, look, I am so worried I might lose my home or my house in the next 5 years, divorced and everything then scatters all over, where I say I need to fix things now. Okay, so the debt and how you finance your ambition or how you finance your strategic thinking, I want to make sure my kids' financial future is secure, versus the tools that are available for me to use, whether it's debt, whether it's me using my skill, right? Or should I invest in my children's future? So potentially, as Waweru, I sacrifice. I say today, I'm going to live a lot simpler, but I'm going to take debt that can invest in getting my kids maybe into the best unis and that sort of thing. Because now I'm thinking, if my kids are exposed to a global that I then know my grandchildren's
are taken care of.
So I think the element of debt is always, just sort of simplifying, is always how strategic as the head of household do you want to be? Because are you thinking about the next 5 years, or are you thinking about even when I'm gone, how is my household, as the Waweru name, for example, or Nduza? That's where I think you want to ask, and the debt that I would take on, whether it is China or Western, how does that align to my objectives or my purpose for my family? And that's what I think is critical. So case in point.
And yet too many an African nation doesn't think like that. And in terms of transparency and accountability, usually this debt is taken for, or these loans are taken for purposes even outside of what laws of nations, require. So are you essentially saying that if you don't think about it strategically, that's when debt becomes a burden as opposed to a benefit?
100%. And that's the element where governance comes in, right? Let me bring it back home again. So Waweru takes this loan.
I'm taking a lot of loans.
Yes, you are. Yes. You're developing what?
I'm developing, yes.
So Waweru takes this loan. It's all very secretive. Waweru falls sick, for example. Right? Maybe he needs to speak to his wife. And his wife is supposed to be then somebody who is supposed to support around that. But if Waweru takes a secret loan, he says, okay, let me take a loan and just put the money aside, as opposed to putting it in a thing that the benefits. The loan will always need to be repaid. Yeah. And that's where the governance elements come in, right? If you're not transparent enough around why are we doing this 30 strategic plan, you then eventually will always find a way of defaulting, right? You sell your soul as well. Yeah, I think that's where we struggle. I think maybe it's an evolution around our governance approach. I'm sort of, I don't want to sound so, but I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think there's certain things that Africa and the governments are sort of looking at, and I'm quite excited about. For example, one, the Pan-African Credit Agency, that we want to be able to control our destiny as who are we as Africans, and this credit rating agency, because if you compare Moody's, or they will look at your economy based on nuances of how the Western economy, and that's a AAA.
Yeah.
But a Pan-African rating agency looks at what are the local nuances, right? Our strategic objective is to reduce poverty. Okay. Maybe the rating agency would say, if you've got a clear approach to reducing poverty, you're a AAA rated, right? It doesn't mean that you're a bad guy and you're a junk, right? So what I'm looking forward to is that element of we are Africanizing our debt. The second thing I'm sort of excited about is guys like ADB have now what you typically call think tanks, and they're now helping African governments negotiate better. So you can leverage, if you're going into a negotiation with China or that, you can leverage the best African talent around what is it we need to be from a project viability perspective, from an impact perspective. I think that those two levers can significantly change the roadmap and what would be important for us over the next 50 years as a continent.
Okay. The way we started the conversation about whether it's reality or rhetoric, Beijing pretty much insists that its model is different now. They're talking about win-win cooperation as opposed to coercion. That's what they're saying. Yet we are seeing a lot of defaulting still on the rise. And China is trying to now really write that playbook a bit. We've mentioned China before, but it does co-chair Zambia's debt structure. So you're in the middle of, and it makes sense. You guys owe us money. We're trying to restructure our debt. So we need to be sitting in that co-chair position. And that's sitting under G20, right? And now they're talking about sustainable lending, which is all well and good. Meanwhile, now our Western powers have rediscovered development financing, right? Through initiatives like the EU's Global Gateway. You've got America's Build Back Better World as well. And Africa is sitting in this middle of the tug of war, like I said. Do we negotiate? How do we negotiate? We're looking at sitting between patient capital and political capital, right? So my question is now, as Africa, we're sitting here and we're witnessing basically a new reordering of financial systems where China is setting the terms and not the IMF. Are we actually looking at that?
I think it's an interesting. It's not an easy answer. But I think what we need to think carefully as Africa is we need to ask ourselves: are we strategic or we are just real estate?
Oh,
okay. And irrespective of China coming to sit on the table and saying sustainable, it then behoves us to change the narrative and say, yes, we now have ability to control our destiny. Why? Because the resources, the global north is there's the global north and the Western have realized that we never did development financing in Africa from the 80s, right? This guy has come in the 2000s and has completely changed that. So then now, I think you're then the bride that can say, hey, okay, this is where I
have so many suitors.
I have so many suitors.
Yeah.
And
eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
And exactly. And then now you have, and this is where the critical bit of how strategic am I, in as much as I have debt restructure. And I'm sort of, this is a bit mischievous, but I always think that China will never China wouldn't want to be seen to take over country sovereignty. It doesn't suit them, right? So there's a bit of, I think we've got wiggle room as Africans where you can say, look, I mean, I can't pay you now. I can't really pay you now, but I want us to work together for the next 50 years, right?
Okay.
So I think there's that, and I think we've got a lot more leverage than we had in the 2000s, where you're not sure what we are doing, we just borrow, and that's now you realize, and there are base cases, is Botswana that's doing well, and that sort of thing. We just need to go back and understand what is working for us as well, and use that as well for political capital, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a geopolitics element to it.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at another aspect of this and try to flip it over that, there are different suitors, like you've talked about before, earlier on, Kev. And that, as you look at who is coming in wooing, whether it's, China, or whether it's the West coming in to woo, which one looks as though it's the better suitor to accept the flower from?
Or the lesser evil. I think a Western suitor typically will come and have conditions on how you generate revenue. The East, or the Chinese, will typically come and finance a visible project, right? Now, it is easy to pass judgment when the Chinese guy comes and technically repossesses, and it looks like this guy is taking over your homestead, right? I financed, as we go back to our earlier example of the hot water shower scenario, I come and yank the hot water, or I come and tell you now I'm going to take out of the 1,000 liters you shower hot water with, 600 is mine. So I bring my family as a Chinese guy and we come and shower in your house. Versus the Western, where I come and I tell you, okay, I'll give you money, but I have conditions, which is, number one, you as the head of the household, this is where you get your revenue from. Okay, I need you to ring fence the following things. Number one, before you pay anything, your credit card debt or your payroll or your check of loans, I need you to do the following things. Your house, number one, everybody must come home by 6 p.m. Otherwise, I'll not give you money, right? So the question you want to ask is, this guy who will come and take your shower versus this guy who will tell you the whole family cannot come home by after 6 p.m. Okay, which is and that question can only be answered individually on a value perspective. So if you value time, right, or if you value independence. So am I independent to take my shower? And I'm just using a very local approach so that it's easier for you to digest. Is what's the lesser evil? I'm happy for somebody to come and shower in my house because I have not been able to. He tells you, no problem, don't pay me. Don't pay me now. I'll extend your shower financing from 1 year to 3 years, but I need to come and be showering every day.
Yeah.
Or I give up my 6 p.m. where I usually have maybe I want to go and have a drink with my friends, and now I can't because if I come home after 6, that loan can be considered a default. And then if it's considered default, the other loans that I have, because when I was given the loan, yes, you were given the loan without any specific project.
But they had seen your behavior.
But they had seen your behavior and they told you, no, you like coming late.
Yeah.
Come home before 6. I need you at 6. So the question is, from you as a head of the household or as a family, what is more important and what are your values? And that's where I would say is a real crux. Is what do you guys hold dear? Is it somebody coming to share a shower with you, or somebody telling you can't come home before 6 p.m.? Okay, one could work for Certain
But,
guys
yeah,
are
different
saying,
strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, just for good, I want to talk a little bit about sovereignty and strategy. But just before that, is there an understanding across board of the thing that you've just said, that nations to understand that you can have a diversification of, the suitors, for example, and even if you do play eeny, meeny, miny, mo, that you can have, different, where you can land on different places. Have we grasped that concept of the diversity that it offers?
I think that is the most important thing we need to do now. Diversify your lenders.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, you need to be able to, for lack of a better word, post each other against each other. Why? Because you'll always then, and I like to give the example of Kenya's economy. We've diversified our economy. We are not an oil producer that you've got 90% of your revenues from one point. So then you don't have any leverage in case where the economic scenarios change, right? Same case with debt, right? I'm happy for me to take some panda debt. I'm happy for me to take some samurai. I'm happy for me to go and sit with the UAE and say, hey guys, let's do a sukuk. Why? Because it then gives you a lot more flexibility around what you want to do, and you're not essentially losing your sovereignty around that. So for me, I am way pro trying to look this side. To answer your question, I'm not sure all African countries have reached there. I think some are more advanced. I think the last 6 months, I think Nigeria has started realizing they have that power. I think Egypt as well is starting to sort of see, with the size of your population, with the size of economic activity, you then have that. I think the smaller nations are not yet there yet. I guess maybe just because of size. But it's an evolution, and I think I'm looking forward to that journey as well.
Okay.
But let me ask a question. I'm going to take a step back. I know we talked about sovereignty, strategy, and the African future. But let me play devil's advocate and throw a bit of petulance into it. Actually, so I go into many suitors per se. For lack of a better term, if one of them catches feelings and said, and there's an aspect of transparency, I go and tell you, by the way, I am wooing so and so and so and so, panda, samurai, what have you.
Yeah.
Then from that perspective, there's one of two things you can do. Number one, you can say, listen, panda is giving me this. What can you do? But it also depends on what you're borrowing for. But what if panda says, if you're taking from samurai, then your interest is going to be, and I'm not going to play ball.
And that's why the ability to negotiate. And I go back to the first point when I said you need to understand what is in it for the other guy. So I go to the panda guy. The panda guy has his Belt and Road Initiative. Why does he want to do this Belt and Road Initiative?
Okay. The
question of why. Okay. So as I am going to panda guy, I am trying to think, what does this guy, what's strategic for him? Why is he doing this? Okay. Then I come to this other guy. Let's talk about the Dubai guy. Okay, this UAE guy. This UAE guy, I ask myself, this guy is sitting on a lot of capital, but he can't deploy it. Right? He's done oil, he's done that. So for him, it's maybe about getting more political influence in Africa. Okay. So I then say, okay, hey, yes, panda guy, I don't think you have a problem with UAE.
Okay.
You get?
Yeah.
So I would say UAE, I don't think you have a problem with panda guy.
Yeah.
You get? But then on the other side, I know there's Western debt who maybe doesn't like panda debt, right? I tell UAE, I tell the Western guy, listen, this guy is not affecting the politics of it and governance. You want me to be well governed? I will do 1, 2, 3 things. I'll do electoral reform. I'll do, because more times than not, it's democracy. So I think for me, that ability to, and it's all about, where I go back again, it's all about your negotiation. You need to think, what does this guy want? This guy is not interested in your political, the panda guy, for example, maybe not interested in your political element. This other guy wants you to be a purveyor of democracy. So you can, and I think Kenya has been good around sort of East versus West sort of thing. I think I have
Struck
to
a
commend.
balance.
We've struck an interesting balance where we've never been sort of told either or. But I'll give you an interesting point.
Yeah.
If you look, and this is just not about Africa, if you look at China over the last 18 months has reduced its US dollar debt by I think maybe about 12-15%. They are strategically de-dollarizing because for whatever reason, maybe they think US will default at some point, right? So as an African leader, I need to think 30 years, 15 years and say, why is this guy reducing his US Treasury debt book? What does he want? So then maybe I tell him, look, why don't you come? Right? You want to get rid of your dollars, right? Okay. Let's sign an export agreement where I will export what do you need in China.
Okay.
What do you need?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then now you start thinking strategically as an African leader and say, if this guy wants to get rid of US dollars, right, it means he needs to import more so that he pays, whether it's Kenya,
USD.
whether he pays in USD. So you sit strategically as an African leader and you say, in 30 years, these guys would want to have maybe 20% of their what they are owed is in US dollar denominator. And then now you start saying, okay, so what are the new verticals I can export to China and get paid USD?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And maybe even just go wild and say, why don't you guys pay me in gold?
But who's thinking like that, Kevin?
I was going to say this.
I mean, it's great because here we can be the mastermind and say, okay, well, this is the great move. But who's thinking like that? Who's applying this strategic thought to the actions that are being taken to get us to the place whereby, okay, if I'm going to borrow, it's going to be strategic?
It's a good question. I think that is the element of divorcing the politics, our democracy politics around our where we want to see ourselves at 30 years, right? Because what I've just talked about has nothing to do with politics. It's something that you want to do through successful regimes, right? Yes, you have your 5-year every 5 years, but you're like, okay, irrespective of our political affiliation, this is something that you want to be thinking strategically as. So,
final shots, parting shot, in terms of the whole aspect. I know we started the conversation about the rhetoric and the reality behind what we term as debt trap diplomacy. Realistically, what you're saying is that we might be making a mountain out of molehill in terms of are we really being strangled by the Chinese? And if the case is that we might seemingly being put in a debt trap, the out in terms of whether we now look at the aspect of renegotiation or, like you said, looking at various suitors, and then also looking at the fact that Western countries now are looking to say, okay, fine, we have money to invest. Then start saying from that perspective, outside of playing the spectrum, to say, okay, fine, we as an African continent will be able to say to the Western countries that we have our conditions in terms of how we're going to borrow. Or will we continue then saying, okay, fine, it's easier, like you said, commercial loans. It's quicker, lower hanging fruit, but we end up choking ourselves at the end of the day. I mean, and that indebtedness, like you said, they might not necessarily want to say, oh, we want to own your country. There's a soft power play to say, okay, fine, we do understand what hardships you're going through. But the question then becomes, okay, so where do we lean, or what is the best practice for us as a continent?
But in short, I think number one, I'm actually very bullish Africa, contrary to maybe what is sort of posted out there. I inherently think there's a lot of learnings that African governments are now sort of taking, and around the element of debt. I think there is a big opportunity to collaborate on. Hey, you've done this before. I think the second thing is a lot more deliberate element around governance. I think it's easy for us to sit here and talk about the opportunities, but if we are not intentional and deliberate around governance, where you're saying, okay, in fact, I was reading, Botswana's central bank has a software where you just click and you can see full details of every loan, right? So that transparency, that honesty, that it's not done in secret where we all flew onto a flight, quietly signed deals and then
collected
5 years later, collected your per diem. So I think for me, the parting shot would be if we can really double down on governance.
Okay.
You then get into a lot better position around managing your debt. Then, of course, there's that element of responsibility, how needing a bit more technical around project viability. And in as much as there may be political pressure to deliver certain infrastructure or signature projects, you then say, okay, where's the middle ground? Maybe I do a not so big infrastructure thing, win a bit on the politics side, and then sort of have that. So for me, that's where I think governance would be the biggest part.
So you don't build bridges over rivers that don't exist.
100%.
Good one.
100%.
Well, I mean, of course, groundbreaking stuff there. If it would actually be looked into. Thanks for joining us in this conversation.
We have to have this conversation again, by the way.
We must.
There's a lot of eye openers that
I'm giddy with excitement.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, you should run for position. Yeah.
There you go. That's the thing. Once you figure out the policy, then run for politics.
Yeah.
Debt reveals character for nations as for people. It exposes priorities, discipline, and values. Africa's infrastructure boom tells a story of ambition, but also of impatience, the hunger to leapfrog without laying the fiscal foundation first.
China didn't trap Africa. Africa trapped itself when it borrowed without strategy, negotiated without unity, and spent without scrutiny. The so-called debt trap is less about Beijing's cunning and more about our collective short memory.
But there's still agency. If African leaders can treat borrowing as a bridge, not a leash, then every loan can serve sovereignty, not surrender it. Because the real debt isn't financial, it's moral. The debt we owe our citizens is to build a continent that owns its choices.
That's the balance Africa must strike. Ambition without amnesia, partnership without dependence, and growth without surrender.
You've been listening to Panel 54, where we rethink the world one African perspective at a time. If this episode made you pause, reflect, or reframe, share it, start a conversation, and tag us in. Find us on our social media at Panel 54 Pod, and don't forget to subscribe, as you will never miss an episode.
Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember to keep the lens clean.